Hello everyone, and welcome to another JavaScript Mastery video. This one is quite special. I prepared for you a full stack MERN application from start to finish. I initially planned on putting it as a paid course, but I later decided to release it completely free for you guys here on YouTube. So, to support this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It shouldn't take more than a few seconds. Now, let me give you a quick demo. The app is called Memories, and it is a simple social media app that allows users to post interesting events that happened in their lives. Let's add a new post to test it out. Let's say that the creator is JavaScript Mastery, title is Learning the MERN Stack, description starting with the project, and we also added some tags and an image. Now we can click Submit. If we scroll down, as you can see, a new post was just added to the database. Now we can edit it by pressing the three dots on the top right. As you can see, our form got populated. We can also edit some different ones. There we have it. And we can also like posts. For example, I can leave a like here, or we can delete a post. So let's try to do that with this one. There we have it. This video is a part 1 of a 2-part series. Second and final video is coming in exactly 7 days. To make sure to be notified when the video comes out, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications. This app might seem simple, but it is a full-fledged CRUD application. That means that if you learn how to build this, you'll be able to build most complicated MERN applications out there. If you think about it, every app is a CRUD app in some way. CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update, and Delete. You can find this pattern everywhere. Building a blog, create posts, read them, and delete them. Building a social media network with users, create users, update user profiles, and delete users. Building a movie app, add your favorites, rate them, and delete them. You get the point. If you learn the concepts and the file structure of the project built in this video, you'll be able to build more complex projects by yourself. Without any further ado, let's dive into the code. Let's start building it. First, we're going to open an empty Visual Studio Code window. You can use any code editor, but I prefer Visual Studio Code for many benefits that it has. Secondly, we are going to go to your desktop and then create a new folder. You can name it Memories Project. Now you have to drag and drop it to your Visual Studio Code. Once we are in, you can go above and then click View and Terminal. This is going to open your terminal. And since we'll be working technically with two different applications here, we're going to split our terminal into two parts. First one is going to be for our client-side application or React side, and the second one is going to be for Node. We are going to create two separate folders as well. First one is going to be named Client, and the second one is going to be called Server. Now, we can cd into client with our first terminal on the left side, and there we're going to initialize an empty React application by typing npx create react app /. Make sure you're in the client directory. In terms of prerequisites, the only thing you're going to need is going to be the newest version of Node. Just click the newest one and download it for your own operating system. While the client side is installing, we can create a new file called index.js inside of the server directory. This is going to be the starting point of our server application. Inside of the second terminal, we're going to navigate to that server directory, and there we're going to run the command npm init -y. This is going to initialize an empty package.json, and now we'll be able to install all the necessary dependencies. Dependencies that we need are going to be as follows. npm install, and we need body parser. This one is going to enable us to send post requests. Then we need course, which is going to enable cross-origin requests. Then we need express, of course. We're going to use express as a framework for creating the routing of our application. And then finally, mongoose. We're going to use mongoose to create models for our posts. And then finally, we need nodemon. We're going to use nodemon so that we don't have to manually reset the server every time we make a change. Instead, nodemon will be doing that for us. You can click enter, and this should install all of the necessary dependencies. While that is installing, we can go into index.js and import these dependencies. First of all, we have import express from express. Then we have import body parser from body minus parser. Import mongoose from mongoose. And finally, import course from course, just like that. Now, you might be confused. If you worked with backend so far, you know that the usual syntax looks like this. Const express is equal to require express. Thankfully, in newest versions of Node, we can use the import syntax, which is a lot more modern and a lot easier to use. The only thing we have to do to enable it is that we have to go into package.json, and there we need to add one line below the main index.js. In here, we have to say type, make sure everything is in double quoted strings. So type is equal to module, and then add a comma. That's it. While we are here, we are also going to delete this test script and add a start script. So start is equal to nodemon index.js. Now you can close your package.json, index.js, and wait until our client side is initialized. Then we'll be able to install all the necessary dependencies for the client side as well. React application is initialized. Let's take a look at what dependencies are we going to need. You can go ahead and type npm install, and we're going to need Axios. We're going to use Axios for making API requests. Secondly, we need Moment. Moment.js is a library for working with time and date. Then we're going to need React minus file minus base64. We'll use this to convert our images. And finally, we need Redux and Redux thunk. Redux thunk is used for asynchronous actions using Redux. With this one command, we're going to install all the necessary dependencies. While that is installing, we can go ahead and check what we have in our client folder. Inside of here, we have an src folder with a lot of things inside of it. We are not going to use all of these things, so I usually like to just delete the whole src folder and create a new one. After you do that, there's only one thing that we absolutely must have in our React application, and that is the index.js file. So you can go ahead and create that index.js. This is the file where we're going to connect our React application to index.html file. So import React from React, import React DOM from React minus DOM, and then also import app from /app. We don't yet have this component, but we're going to add it soon. And then we have React DOM.render. The first thing is the app component, and then the second thing is document.getElement by ID. And then we have to specify the string of root. With this line, we're connecting to the div with an ID of root. Great. Now we have to create that app.js file, app.js, and there we're going to have a simple functional component. So import React from React, const app is equal to a functional component, and there we're going to have a return. For now, let's just create a div, and inside of that div, we're going to have an h1, which is going to say app. And of course, we have to do export default app. With this, we should be ready to run our client side. Let's save it, and let's save the index as well. To run the application, we just simply have to say npm start. That's it. Great, we can see our app here, and if we go back, you can see compiled successfully. For now, we're going to close this terminal by typing Ctrl+C. We did that for a reason that first we're going to set up our backend. We have more stuff that we need to set up there. We need to connect to the database, create a MongoDB cluster, set up the models, and also create some documents. So first of all, we're going to close our client altogether and collapse this, and then finally just go into the index.js of server. That's where we're going to spend the first part of this video in. Inside of here, what you need to do with every Express application is first initialize this app. So app is going to be equal to express, and then you simply run it as a function. Now we can use all different methods on that app instance. First, let's do some general setup. We're going to say app.use, and then inside of there, we're going to say body parser.json. And now in here, we have to do limit is equal to 30 megabytes. I just did that because we're going to be sending some images, which can be large in size. And then we're going to say extended is equal to true, just like that. Now you can copy that line, paste it below, and we are also going to do body parser dot URL encoded and put the same thing as parameters. We're just setting up the body parser so that we can properly send our requests. Now we're also going to use that course, so we're going to say app.use and just put course in there and call it as a function. That's it. Now is the time to connect our server application with a real database. For that, we're going to use MongoDB. More specifically, their Cloud Atlas version of MongoDB, which means that they're going to host our database on their cloud. We can go there. The website is mongodb.com/cloud/atlas. The link is going to be in the description. And then in here, you can click Start Free and then just create a free account, which is going to enable you to create something known as a cluster that's going to act as our online cloud database. Once you do that, you'll be greeted with a website that looks like this. You can just go ahead and click Build a Cluster. Then you can choose Shared Clusters, which is going to be completely free. And then you can just click Create Cluster at the bottom of the page. That's going to start the deployment of our cluster. It can take 1 to 3 minutes, but while that is deploying, let's do some setup. You can go in here to Database Access, and then you can click Add a new database user. In here, you can create your own username and password. I'm going to use JavaScript Mastery, and then password cannot be simply 123, so I'm going to use JavaScript Mastery and then 123, just like this. Now I can click Add User. With these credentials, we'll be able to read and write to any database. Great. Finally, we need to go to Network Access, and then in here, you can click Add IP Address. Once you do that, you can click Add Current IP Address and click Confirm. That's it. Now we go back to clusters and wait until our cluster is deployed. Now you can click the Connect button right here. That's going to ask us if we want to connect it with a Mongo shell, our own application, or MongoDB Compass, which is a graphical user interface for looking at our database's data. We can click Connect Your Application because we want to connect it to our server-side Express and Node application. You can copy this string, and then we're going to go back to Visual Studio Code. Inside of here, I'm going to create a new variable, which is going to be called connection URL, all uppercase. And then in here, you can create a string and simply paste the whole thing that we received right there from our MongoDB Atlas. In here, you can enter your username and password. Make sure to delete these arrows as well. So mine was JavaScript Mastery. And then the password was JavaScript Mastery 123. You can enter your own credentials. That's it. Of course, in real applications, your credentials should be secured, so we cannot simply put them in here. Later on in our video, before the deployment of the whole application, we're going to create environmental variables, and then we're going to store that connection URL right there. The second thing we need is going to be port. So const port is equal to process.env.port. For now, we're going to use the 5000, but later on, once we push this to Heroku, Heroku is automatically going to populate environmental variable called port. Finally, we use our mongoose to connect to our database. Mongoose.connect. It is a function that accepts two different parameters. First one is going to be the connection URL, and the second one is an object with all the options. We're going to use two different options. First one is going to be use new URL parser, which we're going to set up to true. And the second one is going to be use unified topology, which we're also going to set up to true. These are not required, but if you don't set them up, we're going to get some errors in the console, or rather warnings. So let's just have it for simplicity purposes. Now we're not going to end this sentence right there. We're going to chain a .then because this returns a promise. So in here, we're going to have a .then, and also we're going to have a .catch just below. Now, what do we want to do if our connection is successful? Well, then we want to call our app, and then on it, we want to do app.listen. Listen accepts two parameters. The first one is the port, which we just created right there. And the second one is a callback function, which is going to be ran once our application successfully listens. That's going to be a simple console log, which is going to be a template string, and is going to say server running on port. And now we can use template strings to say port. This needs to be all capitalized. That's going to say server running on port 5000. Great. And finally, if the connection to the database is not successful, we're going to have an error there, and we are simply going to console log error.message. That's it. And the final piece of setup is going to be mongoose.set. In there, we're going to set use, find, and modify to false. So just pass a second parameter false. This again makes sure that we don't get any warnings in the console. That's it. Now, if we go back to our package.json, we specify the script start and let's run it. You can go ahead and type npm start. That's going to run nodemon index.js, and we should get a console log saying server running on port 5000. That's it. Our server is successfully connected to the database. And now that we are connected to the database, we can start creating routes for our backend application. To do that, we are going to create a new folder inside of the server, which is going to be called routes. Inside of the routes, we are going to create a file called posts.js. Inside of there, we're going to add all the routes that have to do something with posts, posts being that cars that you saw previously. To do that, we have to import express from express, and we also have to set up our router. Const router is equal to express.router with a capital R. Now we can start adding our routes. Our first route is going to be router.get. The path is just going to be slash, and then in here we can specify a callback function that is going to be executed once someone visits localhost 5000 slash. Great. In here, we're always going to have request and response. It's going to be the same thing for every single callback function inside of our router.get. The second parameter is going to be a callback function that is going to be executed once user visits this route. Inside of every callback function, we have request and a response. For now, let's just do response.send, and then in there, let's say this works. That's it. Now we have to export the whole router. So we're going to do export default router, just like that. And now we can go ahead in index.js and import that router, which we just exported from there. To do that, we have to do import post routes from /routes/posts.js. Now we can use Express middleware to connect this to our application. To do that, we have to type app.use, and then for the first parameter, set up the starting path for all the routes inside of the post.js. And that thing is going to be posts. And in here, we set the routes. So what this did is it said that every route inside of the posts routes is going to start with posts. That means that this route inside of posts is not reached by going to localhost 5000 and then slash. It's reached by going to localhost 5000 and then slash posts, because we added that prefix of posts to all routes in here. Now let's see if we can get this response inside of the browser. To do that, we have to go to this URL, localhost 5000/posts. I'm going to copy it, go back, and then check it in the browser. As you can see, at the top left corner, we get this works, which means that we successfully connected our Express application and we are running it on localhost 5000. Great. Before we move any further with the functionality, we're going to set up an amazing folder structure for all the backend applications. That's going to make them much more scalable. To do that, we're going to create a new folder called controllers. Inside of the controllers folder, we're also going to create a file called posts.js. Inside of there, we're going to create all the handlers for our routes. What does that mean? Well, let me put it side by side. Inside of here, we don't want to have some logic, because if we keep adding routes and adding more complex logic like this, our file for routes is going to get long and we're going to get lost between all the logic and all the requests. And at the end, it's going to be hard to see what routes do you even have access to. To simplify that, we can do something like this. We can extract all the functions or all the logic from the routes and then take it right here in the posts of the controllers. Inside of here, we're going to declare that function for the router.get. Let's give it a name. Const get posts is equal to that same callback function which we just copied. Of course, so that we can use it in Post.js, we have to first export it right there. Export const get posts. Great. Now we can go back into our post.js, and then there we can import all different functions. For now, we have only one. That's gonna look like this. Import, and now inside of curly braces, considering we are doing named and not default export, in there we can name that function get posts from /controllers/posts. That's it. Now the only thing you have to do is simply say router.get, and then we execute a function called getPosts. In here, don't forget to add posts.js. In React, we don't need to do that, but in Node, we absolutely have to. At this point, I don't think you can see the purpose of having the controllers and routes separate, which is completely fine. But as we keep adding more routes, you're gonna see how clean this is gonna look like. We'll be able to see all the routes just like this, and then execute all the functions in the other file. Great. With that said, let's create a new model for our post. We're going to create a new folder called models, and then inside of there, we're going to create a file called post-message.js. Inside of there, we're going to utilize the possibilities of Mongoose. To do that, we have to say import Mongoose from Mongoose. Now, first we have to create a Mongoose schema. Const post schema is equal to mongoose.schema, and that's going to be a function which is going to have an object immediately in there. That's it. Well, what is a schema? With MongoDB, you can create documents that look absolutely different. One can have the title and the message, one can only have the message, and so on. Mongoose allows us to give some sort of uniformity to our documents. We are going to specify that each post is going to have these things. So in here, each post is going to have a title, which is going to be of a type string. Each post is also going to have a message, which is going to be a string. It's going to have a creator, which is going to be also of type string. We're going to have some tags, which is going to be an array of strings. So that's why we put an array sign there. We're going to have a selected file, which is also going to be a string. We're going to convert an image into a string using that base64. Then it's also going to have a like count. This time, we're not going to simply say a number. We're going to say an object, and then inside type is equal to a number, because we have to add additional information. And that additional information is that by default, we want to set it to 0. And finally, we're going to have a created add property, which is going to be an object again of type date. And also it's going to have a default value of new date, just like this. Make sure to call it and write it exactly like this. Now that we have a schema, we have to turn it into a model. To do that, we're going to say const post message is going to be equal to mongoose.model, and then in there we'll do post message. Make sure to do the same thing here, exactly like this post message, or you can call it anything you'd like. And then the second parameter is going to be post schema. That's it. Now we can do export default post message. We are exporting a Mongoose model from the post message file, and then on that model later on we'll be able to run commands such as find, create, delete, and update. Great. Now that our model is done, we can start adding more routes. Inside of here, I'm gonna copy the line. This route is gonna be router.post, and once we go to that route, we're gonna run the create post function, which we are also going to import from the controllers. So in here, create post. Now we have to save it and go to the controllers. In here, we're gonna say export const create post. It's also going to be an error function, which has a request and response. And then in there, for now, let's do res.send post creation. Now is the time that we have to start implementing real logic for getting posts and for creating a post. To do that, we're going to import post message with a capital P from /models and post message.js. This gives us access to our real model. What can we do with that? Well, first of all, each callback function is going to have a try and catch block. It looks like this: try, opening and closing curly brace, and then the catch with an error inside. The code in the catch is going to happen if we get an error right there, and the code in the try is going to happen if everything is successful. So in here, let's try to retrieve all the posts that we currently have in the database. Const post messages is equal to post message dot find, just like that. Now, this wouldn't be correct because post message dot find, or finding something inside of a model, takes time, which means that it is an asynchronous action. For that reason, we have to add a wait in front of it, and therefore we have to make this function asynchronous. After that, we can console log our post messages. And finally, we need to make our function return something. So if everything works, then we're gonna say res.status of 200, which means everything went okay. And then we're gonna return JSON, which is going to simply be an array of all messages that we have. We don't even have to console log it. We're just returning it. That's it. We also have to respond with something if there's an error. So we're gonna say res.status. And then in here, let's do 404 and then .json. And we're gonna return message to be equal to error.message, just like that. Now this is it for our get posts. And how can we see if it works? Well, our server is already running on localhost 5000, so let's go check it out. And that's it. You can see that we have an empty array. This is not that interesting, right? We just have an empty array. Now we have to implement the logic for adding different posts. And we're going to do that right here. To create a post, we're also going to do a try and catch block. With post requests, you have access to something known as a request.body. So we're going to say body is equal to rec.body. And we won't be able to console log this right now for the reason that we don't have a way to send post requests yet. That's the exact reason why immediately after we create this create post, we're going to move on to the front-end side to create a form and basic layout for making different posts. Our request.body is actually going to be our post, so we can name it like so. And then we need to create a new post. We do that by typing const new post is equal to new post message. We call it, and then in there we pass that values that we're receiving to the request.body. Yet we are not sending them, but we're going to do that once we implement the logic on the front end. Then in the try block, we're going to say new post.save. This is again an asynchronous action, which means that we have to add a wait in front of it and also async on the whole function. Once that is saved, we're going to respond with res.status 201, which means successful creation, and then .json, we're just gonna send that new post in. That's it. If it's not successful, we do res.status, and then 409, .json, and then in there, we do message is equal to error.message. You can learn more about this HTTP codes right there under the following link. It's going to be in the description, but generally it looks like this. All requests that start with 200 are successful. 300s are redirections, 400s are client errors, and 500s are server errors. You can take a look. For example, you can read only those with stars. These are the most important ones, and then see what each one says. In here, 200 is the most popular one. The request has succeeded. Great. The link is going to be in the description. Now we have our create post function completely done. And now is the time that we focus more on client and implement the logic for actually sending or creating posts. Moving to the client side, we are now going to create a whole skeleton for the front-end application. There is one thing that I forgot to tell you to install at the beginning, and that is npm install add material -ui and then /core. This is going to be the UI kit we'll be using. Material UI is really popular when working with React because it allows you to create nice looking applications without a lot of styling. While that is installing, let's create our components folder. Inside of there, we're going to have two folders. One is going to be called posts, and the other one is going to be called form. Inside of the form, we're going to create a form.js file, which is going to be our form component. Inside of the posts, we're going to create posts.js file, which is going to be the component for the posts. Each one of these is also going to have its own styles.js, We'll be using Materials UI way of styling. Yeah, it's CSS in JS, but it's not that awful. You're gonna see it soon. And then again, styles.js in the posts. That's why we have folders. The last thing we have to do is create one more folder, which is going to be inside of the posts folder, and that name is gonna be post. Inside of there, we're also going to create just one thing, which is going to be post.js file, and also styles.js. This is the folder structure that works really well in medium to large level applications. You can see everything is nicely put inside of the folders. We have the styles there. And if only one component uses some other component, like only posts uses post, then that post component is going to be inside of there. Maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense right now because we just add a lot of files but not a lot of code, but it's going to make more sense once we actually start writing code. Great, now that we have the structure of our application, let's actually start with app.js. First of all, I'm going to run the application again by typing npm start, and now we can use Material UI components. So first of all, at the top, I'm going to import all the components we're going to use in this app.js file. All components start with a capital letter, and these are going to be container, app bar, typography, grow, and grid. And we're going to import them from add material UI and then /core. Great. Inside of here, let's start with basic structure. I'm going to delete this div and create a container that's going to make sure to just center everything. Inside of there, I'm going to put the property called max width equal to LG, which is large. And then inside of there, first thing that we have is going to be the app bar. App bar is going to have a position of static and also a color of inherit. Inside of the app bar, we are going to have a typography. Typography in Material UI basically stands for any textual element like H2, paragraphs, or really anything, but it gives it a nice looking font. So in there, we can see variant is going to be equal to H2, and we're also going to have a line equal to center. In there, we can put the title of our application. In our case, that's gonna be memories. And this is supposed to be variant, just like that. And then we're going to have our image. So image, in there, we're gonna have an src, which is going to say memories. Alt can be memories. And then we can put the height to be equal to 60. We don't need it to be more than 60. Now, we don't have this image yet, so let's create it. I'm gonna leave the link to the image down below. And then what we can do is you can create a new folder in the src called images. And then inside of there, you can download and put that image, memories.png. Looks like this, just to give some life to our application. I misspelled container there as well. Now we can import that image. That's going to be import memories from /images/memories.png. Great. Now if we save this, let's see if it works. Okay, and we have a huge image right there. Once we add some styles, this should look much better. Before adding the styles, let's just finish with the structure. Below this app bar, we are going to have a grow component. Grow just provides some simple animation. Grow is going to have a property of in, so it's going to grow in. And then inside of that grow, we're also going to have one more container. Inside of that container, we're going to have a grid component. That grid is going to be of a type container. It's going to say justify to space between, and also align items to stretch. And we are also going to give it some spacing, which is going to be equal to 3. That's it. Now, inside of that grid, which is of type container, we can add two different grid items. Let's do that. Grid, and then item. XS is going to be 12, which means that it's going to take the full width on extra small devices. And on small and medium, it's going to be 7, which means that it's going to take 7 out of 12 spaces on small or larger devices. Great, so this is our grid component, and then I'm going to copy it and paste it below. This one is also going to be extra small 12, but we're going to change the small to be 4. Inside of this first grid, we're going to have our posts component. We created a file for it, but we didn't yet create or import the component. And then just below in here, we're going to have our form component. Now we have to create those components and then import them right there. So let's do that. Let's go into the form, and then inside of here, we're going to import React from React. Const form is equal to a normal functional component, which is going to return just an H1 that says form for now. And then we're going to export default form. That's it. I'm going to copy all of this now, go into the posts file, paste it there, and then just change the form to say posts. And then change this to posts. And finally, we're going to do the same thing for the singular post component. In here, I'm going to change posts to simply say post. That's it. We know our hierarchy. Our posts is going to use the post component. So what we're going to do is we're going to import that post into our posts. So right there, below the title, we need to add a React fragment so that we can add multiple things in there. Below posts, we're going to import the post component. So import post from /post/post. And now we can create multiple post components just like so. Let's add 2 for now. Great. The last thing we have to do is collapse this, go into the app, and then finally import the components we just exported. That's going to be import posts from /components/posts, and we need to go one level further to /posts. And finally, you can copy the line and then change this to form. That's it. Now we are importing the posts and the form as well in here. And now we shouldn't get any warnings or errors that we don't have these components here because they're there. You can see the app is compiled and running on localhost 3000. Let's visit in the browser and see what we have. Let's be honest, this looks pretty bad for now, but we're gonna keep adding more styles and structure to it. Firstly, let's add styles to our app.js. Here is how we can properly add styles to a Material UI application. Inside of the src folder, we are also going to create a styles.js file. In here, we need to import make styles from add Material UI core and then /styles. Make sure to import it not as a default import, but as a named import instead of curly braces. And then below, we do export default. We call that make styles. And now inside of there, we put a callback function, which immediately returns an object. This video is about creating a MERN stack application, connecting it to the database, connecting the server to the front end, and everything else that we still have to do. For that reason, you're not going to have to type the styles. I'm going to leave all the files for the styles down in the description and you'll be able to copy them. So let's start with this one. You're going to have these styles. Make sure to copy these from the description, save it, and then go back to the app.js. In here, we have to say import use styles from /styles. And the last thing we have to do is say const classes is equal to use styles and call it just like so. So this is going to be the process for all different components. Again, we're just going to copy and paste it and you don't have to worry about styles. The only thing you have to do is actually add them in here. So let's start with the app bar first. In here, let's do class name is equal to classes.appbar. So the same we called it right here. Great. Then we have to add the classes for the image. So class name is equal to classes.image. And then finally, class name is equal to classes.heading right here. And I just noticed that I have a typo here. This should be height spelled like so. Great. Now, if we go back to our application, let's see how it looks like. As you can see, this is much better. Now let's add the styles for all the other components, meaning posts, post, and the form. You can do that by going into these styles, styles.js, and then just copying the link in the description. You should be able to find all the styles right there. There we go. I copy and pasted all the styles for the form. And now going into the post.js, I'm going to copy and paste all the styles for the post.js as well. Right here, that's it. And finally, styles for the posts, plural this time. We don't have a lot, that's it. After you copy and pasted all these styles, the last thing that you have to do is copy the same two lines. That's this thing here. We have to copy the import use styles, and we also have to copy const classes is equal to use styles. So you can hold Alt or Option and then copy this line and then keep copying this line. Then you can press Ctrl C or Command C to copy both lines, and let's add the same thing to all these files. That's gonna be import that, and then finally drag and drop it here. Same thing goes for the post inside of here. You paste it, import goes at the top, and then we have const classes so that we'll be able to use the classes. And the last thing is in the posts. In here, we also have to import the use styles and then finally use that classes. Great. With this, all the classes are now imported, and then we'll keep adding the JSX, and the only thing you'll have to do is say to something, for example, class name is equal to classes.something. That's it. We simplified your process there. Because this video is long enough, even without adding the styles, we have to focus on things that really matter, connecting this to the backend and connecting it to the database. Now, let's start implementing the calls to the API. We're gonna close this, collapse it, go to client, and then in the client, we're going to create a new folder called API. Inside of the API, we're going to have an index.js file. And inside of there, we're going to import Axios from Axios. We're going to use it to make API calls. In here, we have to specify our URL, and that URL is going to be a string that's going to say HTTP, and then localhost 5000/posts, as we discussed on the backend side. So this is the URL pointing to our backend route. And now in here, we can create a function called fetchPosts, which is going to be equal to an arrow function that's simply going to make an Axios.get call to our URL. As you remember, localhost 5000/posts simply returns all the posts that we currently have in the database. Now we're not going to use it in this file, but rather we're going to export that function. Now we have to focus on adding Redux capabilities, because all actions towards our backend are going to be done using Redux. We need to dispatch those actions. To do that, we have to add some boilerplate code, meaning we do have to create a few files and folders, but later on bigger applications, this is going to be extremely great because of the scalability. And I agree, to implement Redux, you have to add a lot of files and folders, but it's going to be great in the long run because it makes our application scalable. That means that as our application grows, we'll be able to use that same old consistency Redux offers us without any trouble. Great. So to do that, we're first going to create a folder called Actions and a folder called Reducers. Inside of Actions, we're going to create a file called posts.js, and we're going to do the same thing for Reducers. Inside of the Reducers, we are also going to have an index.js file, and this also seems like a good starting point. Now that that is set up, we can go to our index.js file, and this is the place where we are going to initialize Redux. What are some of the things that we need? Well, let's start. Import provider from React Redux. Provider is going to keep track of that store, which is that global state, and that allows us to access that store from anywhere inside of the app. We don't have to be exactly in a parent component or in a child component. We can access that state from anywhere. Then we're going to import, create store, apply middleware, and also compose from Redux. Finally, we need to import thunk from Redux -thunk. That's it. Now let's set it up. To set Redux, we first have to create store. So that's going to be const store is equal to create store. Create store takes in two different things. First, we have the reducers, which we didn't define yet. As you can see, they are red. We need to define the reducers. And the second thing is going to be compose, which is a function. And then in there, we put apply middleware. And then in there, we pass thunk, as you can see. And looks like I misspelled compose at the top. Great. So the only thing we have to do right now is import reducers. We are going to import reducers from /reducers. That means that we also have to go ahead in reducers index.js to export them. Inside of here, we're going to use something known as combine reducers from Redux. And then there we can say export default and call that combine reducers. We call it as a function and then put an object inside of it. Now in here, we can use all of the individual reducers that we have. In our case, we are only going to have posts. So for that reason, we have to import posts from /posts. So we can go to that file, and now let's talk about reducers. What are reducers? Well, a reducer is a function, so let's do it like that. Const reducer is equal to a function. More specifically, it is equal to a function that accepts the state, and also it accepts the action. Then, based on the action type, so if action.type is equal to, let's say, create, then we want to do some logic here. More specifically, we want to return either action or we want to return the state changed by the action. Usually, you're going to have multiple if statements for a lot of different things. And for that reason, people prefer to have the switch statement. And this is how it works. You have the switch statement, and then right there, as a key, you put the action.type, as we discussed. And now in here, we can specify all of our types. For example, we know that we're going to have a fetch all action for fetching all the posts. And let's also do the one for creating. So that's going to be create post. Great. In here, we are later going to return some logic, but since we don't have anything yet, let's just return the state. And in reducers, the state always needs to be equal to something. We cannot have it equal to nothing. That's why we have to set this initial value. Our posts are going to be an array, and that's why we are specifying this empty array there. And also, just to simplify things, our state is always going to be simply posts because we are in a post reducer, so we can rename the state to posts. And also, as a default return, people usually just put return and then posts. That's it. We're going to add logic here later on, but now we just need to set it up so that it works together once we connect the Redux to the store. Great. Now we can see that this reducer is currently not being used. So what we can do is just export default, that function we created. We don't actually have to use it here. We are using it in here in combine reducers. We are importing that posts and then setting posts equal to be posts. Considering both the key and the value are the same, we can only keep the first one. That's it. We can put this in one line. And as you can see, our index.js of reducer is done. Now we are successfully exporting the thing that we previously imported in here in the index.js of the SRC. And now we have this variable in the store. Now that this store variable is successfully created, we can wrap our application with a provider component. We're going to do it right here. Provider. And then we wrap our application with it. We can do it like so. We're going to put the app here and then just move the comma right there. People usually like to span it across multiple lines just so it looks simpler to understand. And this is it. The last thing we have to do is specify the store to be equal to the store we just created right there. That's it. Our application is now successfully using Redux and we can start using all of its capabilities. It looks like we forgot to install one thing, which is React Redux. So just copy that, close the terminal by Ctrl+C, and then in there you can type npm install and then React Redux. Once that is done, it means that our application is successfully connected to Redux. Now we can start making use of it. First, we have to dispatch our getPosts action. And we are going to do that into our app.js. So let's go in there. In pre-hooks era, Redux was kind of hard. You had to go down here and then do some crazy syntax like this and then map state to props. It was crazy. Now, with use of hooks, we can use Redux much more easily. What we can do is import a hook from React Redux. So import use dispatch from React-Redux. What this allows us to do is to dispatch an action. Okay, so how does it work? First of all, we have to define that dispatch. So we need to say const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. That is a hook. Now that we have access to this dispatch, we need to find a way where we are actually going to dispatch the action. And the best way to do that is inside of the useEffect. UseEffect is initially going to be just the component that mount, but later on it's gonna become the component will update. So to do that, we have to specify the useEffect. It looks like this. We call it, and then inside of there, we put a callback function, and as the second parameter, we put an empty array there. And finally, we can use this dispatch to dispatch an action. Right now, we don't have any actions in here, so our next goal is to create an action. We can do that right here by importing it. Import get posts from /actions/posts. You can see it's not currently being used, so how do we use it? Well, you just specify the function, get posts, and then you call it. This is our successful dispatch. That's it. And React is telling us, please include the dispatch in here in the dependency array, so let's do that. Great. Now it's time for us to actually export get posts from the actions. Let's go there. Inside of here, inside of the post, we just have a completely empty file. Now we have to make use of this index.js file in the API we created not that long ago. To do that, we're going to do import star as API from /API. This import star as means that we import everything from the actions as API. That means that we'll be able to use this fetch posts like this, API.fetchPosts. And we do it this way because we're going to have a lot of calls exported from the API. Now we have to create actions, more specifically, action creators. Action creators are functions that return actions. How do they look? Const get posts is equal to an arrow function, and there we can declare an action. Const action is an object. Actions must have the type property. In this case, let's say that we're going to name it fetch all. And also they can have some payload. And payload is usually the data where we store all of our posts. And finally, we have to return it. Return action. This is it. We successfully created this action creator. The problem is we're working with asynchronous data. To actually fetch all the posts, some time is going to have to pass. And for that, we have to use Redux Stunk. Redux Stunk allows us to in here specify an additional arrow function. Bear with me, the syntax is crazy, but you just have to do this. Async, and then one more set of parentheses, and then in there as a property, we get access to dispatch. This is it. Now we created a function that returns another function, and now we can use the async await capabilities. Of course, we have to have another arrow right there. Great. And there is one more difference. Instead of actually returning the action with Redux Stunk, what you have to do is you have to dispatch the action. That's it. So just to recap, let's go back. Action creators are functions that return an action. And an action is just an object that has the type and a payload. With Redux Stunk, since we'll be dealing with asynchronous logic, we have to add this async dispatch function in front of it. And then instead of returning the action, we have to dispatch it. To actually make this work, let's add a few lines. We're going to add that try and catch block. And then in the try, I'm going to try to fetch all the data from the API. We can do it like this. Const, we're immediately going to destructure the data. And then is equal to await API.fetchPosts. So what we're doing in here is we are first getting the response from the API. And then in the response, we always have that data object, which we are returning from the backend. And then we get the data. And basically, data represents the posts. So what we can do is in here, we can remove this action, and we can immediately dispatch an action. An action is, as we said, an object, which includes the type. The type is going to be fetch all. And then the payload is going to be data. Now we are successfully using Redux to actually pass or dispatch an action from the data from our backend. In here, we can simply console log the error.message. And if you remember, we actually imported this action, which means that we have to export it. So export const get posts. That's it. As soon as this action gets dispatched, and we're doing that from here, we immediately go to the posts reducer, and there we have to handle the logic of fetching all posts. Considering we are immediately fetching all of our posts in here, we are fetching the data from the API and then sending that data through the action.payload, we can immediately, in the reducer, just do this. Return action.payload. And that action.payload are our actual posts. Now, we've been working a lot with all of this Redux data passing, but how do we actually retrieve the data from within our components? Well, to do that, we are now going to in the component that actually needs the posts, and that's gonna be posts component. Inside of there, we have to somehow fetch the data from that global Redux store. We can do that with the help of something known as selectors. So in there, we're going to import use selector from React Redux. Great. Now that we have that, we again initialize it as a hook. We're gonna say const posts is equal to use selector. Inside of the use selector, we're going to have a callback function. As a parameter in that callback function, we get access to that whole global Redux store or state, and then we can immediately return state.posts. How do we know that it is called posts? Well, if you go to the reducers index.js, you can see in here we have posts. That's it. Now that we're getting these posts, what do you say that we just do a simple console log and put them there? Great. Now we save this and let's see if any data is showing up. Open the console, refresh, and you should be able to see we do get an empty array at first in posts 11, but then we get a network error saying access from origin localhost 3000 has been blocked by course policy. There is one thing that we need to do in our React applications to make requests to our server work. To do that, we need to go back into our package.json of the client side, and just below this private to true, we're going to set a proxy. Proxy is going to be equal to, and now we need to specify our port, HTTP, localhost, and that's gonna be 5000. If we now save this, whenever you change a package.json file, you need to rerun your terminal. So I'm gonna close it and then run npm start one more time, and let's see if that's gonna fix our issue. After I spent some time debugging, I found that the thing that we added, the proxy, that was absolutely necessary, but that wasn't the fix to our issue. The fix was this little bug right there. We specified the routes before we specified app.use course. So we need to have the course above the actual app.use routes right there. If you now save this and then go back, you should see, if you refresh, that we don't get an error anymore and we just have an empty array. At first, we have this empty array because that's what we set up right there in the reducer. But later on, once we make a request, then we get the new empty array, and that's after the data has been fetched. The data has been successfully fetched, but still it's an empty array. That means that the GET request works, and now is the time to implement the form so that we can make a post request to our database and actually add new posts. Let's start by adding the JSX to our form. First of all, we have to import all the components we're gonna use. That's gonna be text field, button, typography, and paper. And all of that is coming from add material UI /core. Now, let's create our form. Inside of here, we are going to create a paper. Paper is like a div that has whitish background. In there, we are going to add a class name, which is going to be equal to classes.paper. Remember, we imported all the classes so that we don't have to create them now. Inside of there, we're going to have a form. Form is going to have autocomplete set to off. Then we can add no validate. Class name is equal to classes.form. And then finally, we have the onSubmit, which is going to say handle submit, just like that. A long line, but we have everything that we need. And that handle submit is going to be the handler function, so we can create it right now. Handle submit is going to be equal to an arrow function. And then later on, we're gonna add what we need inside of there. Great. Moving on to what we have inside of the form. Inside of the form, first thing that we're gonna have is going to be a typography. More specifically, we're gonna use a variant of h6. And then inside of there, we can say creating a memory, because all our posts are indeed memories. Below that, we're going to have a text field. Text field is a self-closing tag. And then first text field is going to be about who is creating a post. So we're going to say name is equal to creator. Then variant is going to be outlined. Label is going to be creator with a capital C. Then what else do we have? We're going to make it a full width. So full width, just like so. And then finally, we can add a few more properties. That's going to be value and the on change, two of the most important things. And this is already getting long, so let's space this out in multiple lines. Variant, label, full width, and then finally, the last two are going to be the most important ones, and that's going to be value. And finally, the on change. Okay, great. So where are we going to store that value, and what is the on change going to do? Well, the value is of course going to be stored in the state, more specifically in the state called post data and then .creator. That means that the whole data from our post is going to be stored in the post data object in the state, and then each object key is going to be a specific text field. So let's create that state using the useState property. In here, we're going to import the useState hook, and then right there, we're going to say const post data and then set post data is equal to useState, and that's going to be an empty object. Inside of that empty object, we need to specify the properties that the object is going to start with. So in here, we need to mention everything that it's going to have. First of all, the creator property, which we just specified, is at the beginning going to be an empty string. Title, also an empty string at the start. Message, also going to be an empty string. Tags is going to be also an empty string. And finally, selected file is also going to be an empty string. We're going to convert an image to a base 64 string just in a second. Okay, we can put this in one line so it's easier to read. And that's it. We can remove the last comma. Great. Now we have that post data and we are using that right here in the value. So how are we going to change the value of that state field using this on change? Well, that's a bit harder, considering in here we have an object that's in the state and we want to update just one of the object's properties. To do that, we can use this syntax. In here, as always, we have a callback function that has that event as a parameter. Then we have the set post data, which is a setter method for that state. And then in here, it would be easy if we could just specify an object. And then in this case, say creator, and then creator is equal to e.target.value, right? That would be okay. That wouldn't be all that complicated. But it's not that easy, because later on, if we add a second text field, that means that we would always override everything and simply have the creator. We wouldn't have any other fields because you can see we are not specifying them in this object right here. To fix that, what we actually have to do is first spread the post data. So that's ... post data, and then we have the creator right there. That means that in every text field, if we do the same thing but only change the last property, that means that all the data is going to persist while changing only the specific property of that specific text field. That's it. A bit harder, but a great lesson to learn. Whenever I come across a piece of syntax that is a bit lengthier, such as this one, I copy it and then go to the website called mem.dev. In here, I can log in and it's going to allow me to train on that same syntax. In here, I can just click create a card and paste that snippet right there. In this case, I just want to learn this thing. That's the hardest thing. That's the thing that we have to spread and then use the creator. We can set the text highlighting to JavaScript, and I can say I just learned how to set the state using an object. Now it allows me to train. It's gonna keep asking me to do the same thing until I'm 100% sure that I can replicate this always and it's completely ingrained in my memory. I know that I need to spread it, post data, and then finally I have to do creator is equal to e.target.value. And that's it. I click submit. You can see it's correct. And now, since I know it, I can click easy, but if you don't know it, you can practice on this and it's gonna keep repeating so that you can practice it every few days until you actually remember it. Great. That's it. Just wanted to let you know that. Now we can go ahead and add multiple text fields. This one is only for the creator. I'm gonna put all of this in one line since we already know what is in there. And now I'm gonna just copy and paste it a few more times. We're gonna need it once for the creator, once for the title, then the message, and then finally the tags. Great. Of course, we have to change the labels as well. So this is creator, this is gonna be the title. In here we have the message, and finally the tags. And now we have to change the values as well. This thing here is gonna be a title, therefore title is also gonna be here. In here and in here we have the message. And finally in here and in here we have the tags. That's it. We now have 4 text fields. Now let's do the most important thing. We're gonna create a div. That div is going to have a class name of classes.fileInput. And then inside of there, we have to use that package we installed at the start. It's called FileBase. So at the top of our file, we're gonna import FileBase from react-file-base64. And now we can use it as a component, FileBase. And we have to specify a lot of properties in there. So first of all, the type is going to be equal to the file. Multiple is gonna be set to false. We only need 1. And then onDone function is going to be set to a callback function where in here we do one destructuring, we get that base 64 thing, and then in here we need to return, or rather set post data, and then we have an object. In there we spread the post data, and finally set the selected file to be equal to this base 64 we are receiving from here. That's it. We can also put this in one line right now. That's it. We now have all the inputs. We are missing only one thing, and these are going to be the buttons. So first button right there. The button is going to have a class name of classes.buttonSubmit. It's also going to have a variant of contained, color of primary, size of large, type of submit, and then finally it's going to have a full width property, and the button itself is gonna say submit. You can see we have so many props in here, so many, but usually if you don't have this, you would have to have 100 lines of CSS for that nice looking button. With Material UI, we just pass props and that's it. We need one more button to clear the form. For that, we're gonna copy this one. Simply remove the class name. We don't need it here. The variant should be contained in both cases, not container, contained. Color is gonna be secondary here. Size is gonna be small. And then in here, we're going to have an onClick function rather than type submit. So onClick is going to be equal to clear. That's gonna be a callback function to clear it. And in here, we can also say clear. Great. Now, as we did with the handle submit, let's create that clear so that we don't have any errors. There we go, and save it. Now, if we go back to the browser, we should see a nice looking form. And we have a nice looking form, but it's not perfect. These inputs should be stretching and have some margin. So let's see what went wrong there. In here, what we needed to do is have multiple classes here. So we need to make it a template string. And the first class is going to be classes.root to actually provide that padding and margin. And the second one is going to be classes.form. That should fix the issue. Let's see if it works. Save it and then go back. As you can see, now we have those margins. And the last thing would be, in here, we have full width value, but we need to separate these words, of course. So if you do it like this and go back, that's it. We finally have a nice looking form. And now that we make a post request, we are going to be able to add a new post into our database connected to our server. Now let's add the API request and the action for the post request. First, let's go to the API, and then in here, we're gonna do export const create post. In here, we're gonna have a callback function. This one is going to take in one parameter, and that parameter is going to be the entire post. After we get the post, we can say axios.post. First, we have to specify the URL, and then we have to specify the data we are sending. Of course, in this case, the data we are sending is going to be the whole new post. Now that we are exporting this, we can go back to actions. Inside of the actions, let's create it. Export const create post is going to be equal to the same thing, an arrow function, which then returns another arrow function with a dispatch right there that comes from Redux stunk. And finally, we're going to do a try catch block inside of there. Try catch. Inside of the try, we need to get that data. So that's going to be const. We destructure the data from the response, and that is equal to await API.createPost. This is basically making an API request, a post API request to our backend server, and we are sending a post right there. Finally, we're going to dispatch an action. The type of the action is going to be create, and then the payload is going to again be the data, just like so. Great. In here we have the post, and the post we're receiving it, if you remember, through here. So in here we're gonna say post. Great. And finally, if this is not successful, we are simply gonna console log the error, just like so. Now, if you remember correctly, we have to dispatch that action. To do that, we can go into the form, and then in here, we can import that use dispatch from React Redux. Import use dispatch from React minus Redux, just like this. Great. We have to use it right there. Const dispatch is equal to use dispatch. And now this allows us to actually dispatch actions. The question is, where do we want to dispatch it? Well, of course, on the handle submit. Once the user submits, we want to send over a post request with all the data that user typed in. First of all, we always have to say event.prevent_default, not to get the refresh in the browser. And then in there, we're going to dispatch an action. So dispatch, this time it's going to be create post. And now inside of there, we're going to pass all the data from our state, post data. You can see create post is still red, which means we have to import it from actions. So in here, we can say import create post from //actions/posts, just like that. I can see event is not there, so we have to specify it here. And now we are making that request once we click the submit button. Great. Once the action is dispatched, then we go to reducers right there in the post reducer. And then what do we want to do once we go to the create? Well, we have to send over an array. Of course, we have an array of posts. First of all, we have to spread all the posts, and then we have to add a new post. And that new post is stored in the action.payload. That's it. Now, if we save that, if we are lucky enough, if we don't have any bugs, this should actually work. Let's go back to our form. Let's try creating our first memory. Inside of here, I'm going to put creator as JS Mastery. The title is going to be New Year's Eve 2019. The message is going to be had a lot of fun, I guess. And then let's add some tags. Let's say New Year and also Happy New Year. People do that with hashtags, right? Great. Now we have to choose a file. Okay, I prepared a nice looking fireworks there. Let's save it. And now let's click submit and hope for the best. As you can see, something happened and we got an array back, array that has one file in it. That seems great. Of course, we're not seeing anything yet because our posts and post is not displaying anything. But if we go back to our cluster and then in here, you can go back to Atlas and then click collections. If you go into collections, you can see the data that is actually in the database. In here, we have post messages, and would you look at that? That definitely looks like the object or the memory we just created, which means we, right now at this point, successfully created a full stack MERN application. First, our React application, more specifically the form right there, sent a post request to our backend application. Then the backend application communicated that to our database, And that's it, we have this file saved. That means that now we can set up the posts and the post, create some JSX there, and that post is going to be there every time we refresh the page, and we can keep adding new ones. That's it for the part 1, but don't worry, part 2 is coming in exactly 7 days. You're already half done because next video is the last one. Next time, as you can see, we're going to add the post component, like, edit, and delete functionalities, and much more. To make sure not to miss the next video, like and comment on this one, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, and more importantly, turn on all notifications by clicking the bell icon. You can also help sponsor JavaScript Mastery by clicking the Patreon link down in the description. Stay safe and see you in the next one.